What's going on, Badger Nation? Welcome to the PPC Den podcast, your home for all things Amazon advertising tips, tricks, strategies, and jokes about Amazon advertising. Today, I am very privileged to be joined by my dear friend, Brent, talented, smart agency owner from AMZ Pathfinder. Brent, I heard you, can I share this info? I heard you woke up in Paris this morning. Well, you
That's
live
right.
in France, which is less exciting. I mean, you live in France anyway.
Yeah. You make it sound like it was an accident. No.
Yes. Waking up in Paris is the way to wake up, I feel.
Is the way to wake up. Actually, I had a very lucky spell. So I hadn't been there in close to 2 years, thanks to COVID and everything. But I was there for both business and fun, having lunches and dinners, all kinds of nice people from our industry and friends in the town. And I got a lucky spell. Weather was nice, sunny but cold. And now I'm back here down south in Montpellier, my home. But I did wake up there this morning, so it's been a whirlwind of a day. It's a long train ride.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Did you start your morning with coffee and a croissant on a balcony looking at the sunrise over the Eiffel Tower? If not, I don't want to hear it.
Okay, no comment.
Brent, I'm super stoked to have you here. Also, side note for the listeners who really pay attention, we both have DC shirts on today. Shout out to Dan and Ian for connecting us, I think, originally many years ago.
That's right.
DC Secret Club, which we can say no more about right now. But we've got a great episode lined up for you today. This is a cool little episode. We do these kinds of episodes sometimes. I think we did an episode like this many moons ago talking about updates to like campaign types. I think we did an episode like that where we were just like looking at new features of sponsored display or something like that.
I think it was the bidding adjustments for sponsored products or something.
Something.
Based on rules.
Yeah, so it's always important to like look at the new updates that are happening in Amazon advertising, look at them, digest them. And when you are involved in like making so many episodes, it allows you to sort of look at things with a really refined lens. So that is what we are here to do with you today, dear listener. We're going to be looking at some of the news from Amazon advertising, specifically related to bulk operations files, bulk op files, bulk sheets files, whatever the name you call it is, but basically the way to manage Amazon advertising with spreadsheets. It is more of an intermediate and advanced topic, but because we have so many intermediate and advanced business owners, FBAers, Amazon marketers, freelancers, all agency people, all those good things, and potentially just some random people that thought this was some kind of podcast about wild animals. We're going to be looking at some of these new bulk file updates, sharing our take on it, and some ways for you to get some value out of it. And with that, let's jump into some big principles first. Alrighty, one thing we wanted to do, Brent, is just talk about big principles before we get down to the nitty-gritty. I'm a big fan of principles in general. I actually just started reading Ray Dalio, Principles for a Changing World Order.
Seems timely.
It's amazing. Have you ever read Ray Dalio's first book, like other book, Principles?
I've seen presentations by him. I haven't read any of his books, but it's probably on my list. I think it's probably a good shout.
Yeah, really interesting stuff. But anyway, I'm inspired now to do some of these big principles first as we go through it. I'll share some. You could share some of yours. But I think my first principle is, if you are in the world of digital marketing in any form, website design, anything, like social media, obviously we are in Amazon advertising, but if you are working online, you need to dedicate some time to stay up to date with things. Anyone listening to this is already doing it because that's what the purpose of this goal. It's for, me personally, to like be touching these things and presenting them and sharing them. So definitely dedicate time as part of your normal routine to stay up to date with things, make life easier. Shout out to this podcast. Just listen to this podcast. You need systems to update your systems. It's meaning if you have created systems for your company to operate in the world of Amazon advertising, you need time to update your system. So like learn, how is my system changing so that I'm implementing the new things and doing it right. I can't tell you how many Amazon advertisers I meet and like 95% of their knowledge is just on sponsored products. Like they're using their systems from, 24 months ago, where like they are deep into sponsored products, but haven't touched on the other campaign types. So that's an example of like an out of date system. So like make time to update your systems. And like those are some principles that I wanted to share.
Yeah. The way I think about it, Mike, is actually like the ground is shifting underneath us constantly in this industry, which is part of what makes it so exciting. And I personally think engaging, and that might be tiring for some people who would prefer to be somewhere where things don't change and they know, oh, okay, I learned this 5 years ago, or I got my university degree in this. Hey, a good example is a doctor. Like human body evolves very, very slowly. Pancreas is a pancreas. And there's new medical breakthroughs and everything, I'm sure, but those fundamentals aren't going to change. But for us, the ground is moving. And we can either receive telegraphs from Amazon by what they're doing, right? Oh, we're doing this, we're doing that, if we have a connection there or some kind of connection with Amazon, but also just watch their movement. What's that phrase? Like watch their feet, not their mouths. So it's interesting to see what Amazon's doing when they actually are doing, releasing things. This bulk file update is a big one because they really changed a lot. Actually, it's a different animal.
Yeah, exactly. An easy way to think of it is they haven't updated the bulk file format in a while.
Ever? Has it ever been updated?
Yeah. It hasn't updated it for a very long time. And basically, if I could summarize this in 10 seconds, they've just incorporated a lot of the new features, specifically a sponsored display, some sponsored brand stuff, and some sponsored product stuff, predominantly sponsored display. They just baked a lot of those updates from the last 1 to 2 years into the new bulk file format. So that's really nice. And again, personally, my principle when it comes to bulk files is I still believe that there is no better way to create campaigns quickly and at scale, because it allows you to build it in any format that you want, any structure that you want based off your exact product catalog. So I think if for nothing else, I think there's better ways to do like bid optimization than using a bulk file. So I think there's better ways to do other things, but I think bulk sheets still takes the cake for creating campaigns. So for nothing else, familiarize yourself with creating campaigns using the bulk files format. And I think it will save you time, especially if you have a high SKU count. If you've got a lot of SKUs, I think honestly, it becomes useful maybe at the 25 SKU mark, maybe at the 20 SKU mark. Like, I don't think you don't need thousands of SKUs in order for bulk sheets to become worth it for you to learn these things.
And as we talked about briefly before starting is, one campaign, 3 campaigns, or you could probably build that through the interface. If you're talking about 10, 15, 20, that's the time in which it's probably smarter for you to invest the energy and effort to learn how to do it properly through bulk files. It's very well documented in order to build them out at true scale. And that's where you're maybe you'll even build a macro. We've done that at Pathfinder, or at least for the last version, not for this new one yet, but for the last one, we have a macro that helps with that. Or you have someone on the team who has templates that they use to do it at scale. And the last part I'll leave with that is there's no software that I know of that can build campaigns at scale, but in a way that is very flexible and customizable. I mean, your own tool does single keyword ad groups, right? Which is very helpful. And I think that's great. I know other tools that do similar things. We've used tools in the past that have tried to do them at scale. Can't say I've had a lot of success with it. Maybe there's one out there, but a lot of them are using what I would call a prescriptive method of building campaigns, where they're saying, this is the way our software does it. And if you don't like it, well, then you have to build it yourself some other way. Too bad,
Yeah. It's part of the reason why we don't want to force people into one particular campaign structure build out. So that was always a consideration of ours, because so many different SKU types and SKU characteristics. Some people have a lot of parent children, other people just have so many of them, and there's different things. Maybe they don't want to advertise everything. So there's a lot of considerations to make when doing campaign structure build outs, and bulk files are one way to do it. With all of that said, let's jump into what this update actually is, some of the most meaningful updates, as well as how to really stay on top of them and really take time as an extension after you listen to this podcast. So with that, let's jump in to what these updates are. Alrighty, moving on to these updates. So let's just go rapid fire, ping pong back and forth. One meaningful update, the first one that I'll talk about, is they've, I want to say, added a whole bunch of new columns for you. But they've got 3 key ones that are worth mentioning first. These 3 columns, they're new, sort of column 1, 2, and 3, which you'll have almost every time you do anything here, is they added a product field. And what they mean by that is like add product, which is good vocabulary here. So like what kind of ad product are you using? So they want you to label sponsored product, sponsored brand, sponsored display, which makes a lot of sense. The next column is the entity, which makes a lot of sense too. It's like, is it a campaign that you're working with? Is it an ad group? Is it a keyword? Is it a target? So on and so forth. And then the last column of the new ones is in operations. So are you creating it? Are you updating it? Are you archiving it? So a good example of this is I want to create a new sponsored brand. So you would do sponsored brand in the first column, you would do campaign in the next column, and then you would do create in the next column. So I think these 3 ones are like key in your understanding of like organizing every row of your bulk sheet. So I think these columns are good to have. And I think anytime you get like one of these sort of guiding columns that helps you keep everything else organized. So if you can nail those 3, it's a great entry point into understanding bulk files, because like, just ask yourself, what am I going to be doing? Well, let's say you wanted to change a keyword bid for sponsored brands. So the first column would be sponsored brands. The next one would be keyword. The next one would be update. So like that allows you to just really stay organized in that way. So those 3 columns I think are really helpful.
Yeah, it's a foundation for everything else in the new format. And one thing I'll point out is that when you actually download a bulk file in the new beta format here, the columns A and B, the product and entity, are already filled in. But column C, the operation, is blank, because that operation is you describing to the system when you re-upload it what action you intend to take. So that's really helpful, because I think in the past I've unintentionally taken actions with bulk files by doing something because it was unclear to me, like maybe I put it in the wrong row, or screwed up the formatting in some system in some fashion, and then it would take action. But with this, you're being extremely explicit about what you want to do. There's 3 options, and you have to put something in there. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, but if you put nothing in there, it's not going to try to take any of those actions, right? It's not going to do it.
It needs to know what it's doing. Yeah. Also, you brought up a phenomenal point. It's probably should have been one of the principles here. But like a great way to see some of the changes of the new bulk file is to just download a new bulk file, and you'll see your campaigns in all of their glory in a bulk file. So that's a phenomenal way to see some of these new rows. So, as we were prepping for this episode, like that's what you should do. Like if nothing else, go to your bulk file section, which you see on the left side. So like you mouse over sponsored ads, you click on it, and then there's a bulk operations tab after you first click on sponsored ads. Do that and download a bulk file. And I would say uncheck everything. So they have an exclude area when you download a bulk file. Unclick everything to include everything so you can see what it looks like in mass. And then just download that, create a spreadsheet for download, and then just take a look at what it will look like. And I think that's a great way to familiarize yourself with all of these new columns, because there's too many to mention here. But if you just download a bulk file, you'll see all the additional columns that you have. Audience, you'll see new audience targeting, numbers, and all these good things. You'll see brand asset data, IDs, but we'll get to that. So I think that's an important principle. Like if nothing else, go and download a bulk file and just see what it looks like, which is a great way to interact with this stuff.
Yeah, you can even look at them next to each other on a big enough monitor or 2 monitors. And if you're familiar with what it looks like from the original format, it's much easier for you to compare to the new one, compare and contrast.
Yeah. So what other updates do we have here?
One that really stood out to me, I'm not sure if this is exactly in order, but I really like it, is basically some of the new metrics that they provided in the columns. Or by new, I mean new to bulk files. We all knew what these were before. But click-through rate, conversion rate, and ROAS. I think those are the 3 new ones.
Right. Conversion rate, Amazon seems to have a love-hate relationship with it.
Yeah.
Sometimes they list it for certain things, sometimes they don't, but it is finally here in our bulk download. So if you have any kind of analysis that you like to do where you want to look at conversion rate in mass and you are using bulk files, well, now you can do that, which is pretty nice.
So Mike, a quick exercise for us. Raise your hand if you have a macro or have had in the past a system to make those metrics appear in bulk files, even though they're not there natively.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
So now they just give it to us. We don't have to do that anymore, which is great.
Yes, I love it. So that's really neat to be able to get that in there. Another interesting thing too. So I really like things that make other things easier. I really like an easy, tiny domino to push that will make future larger dominoes easier to use some momentum and inertia. So like, that's why I liked the first 3 columns that I mentioned, because it helps cue you up for the other operations that you'll want to do. What I also think is neat is they changed record ID, which used to be this strange thing. It'd be this big string of numbers, and then it's like you wouldn't exactly know what the record ID is referring to until later. What I think is neat here is that it's changed to like individual IDs for different things, meaning if you're going to be working with a campaign, then you'll have a campaign ID. If you're working with like a portfolio, it'll have a portfolio ID, or if you're working with the ad group, it'll have an ad group ID, keyword ID, all these different things. It'll just helps keep you a little organized, which I really like. So what's cool about it is you will see a product ID, like a keyword ID, when you're looking at a row for a keyword, which I think is really nice. So it's just another way to keep things a little bit more organized, which I'm a fan of. So like, you have a better sense of like where you are now. So that's like one of these easy, simple dominoes that once you realize it, it just makes everything else a little bit easier.
That's a really good one, Mike. And you know what? I noticed looking at it just before the call that we also have IDs for things like drafts. So you pointed this out, like Sponsored Brands has a draft. You can make a draft. You don't necessarily have to ship it. You don't have to make it live. But even the draft has a draft ID. Which is really cool. And looking at these for the campaign IDs in particular, working with various software providers over the years, I've always asked them to help us rename campaigns and ad groups at scale, which is spoiler alert, something we'll get to here in a second. But when they do that, we have this campaign ID come out, and so I'm familiar with that from working with them and that through the API. So this is like part of what Amazon says, which is like this bulk file is brought to parity with features in the API. These two things are looking a lot more similar. And this record ID is kind of like them exposing that. I'm sure you'd probably see or feel the same from being, development work. Yeah,
exactly. So like, let's just get to it. One of the coolest updates here is that you can change campaign or ad group names in bulk at this point, which is the coolest thing here.
Huge. Absolutely huge.
Right. So like, if you know like some spreadsheet work, and if you don't know concatenate, I can never say this word.
Concatenate.
Right?
Yeah. That's a tough one.
Yes. So if you don't know what that function is, it's phenomenal for like putting a suffix at the end of a campaign. So if you wanted to like just tag a whole bunch of different campaigns with like extra words at the end of it, maybe SP for sponsored products, you can now, like if you know your spreadsheet work. But basically you can change campaign names in mass, which is super nice. And that's probably the best feature of this update. So like if you have messy campaign names, like that's one of the first things that
No excuse.
There's no excuse anymore.
Not anymore. No, it's so easy now.
It's one of my favorite things to do. Like if I'm auditing a campaign or checking in on somebody's account, I always look at like, that's an incredible health metric. Like, do you have consistent, clear campaign naming? And if you do, you are probably going to be in pretty good shape. Like that's a good leading indicator.
Oh, for sure.
That like somebody's paying attention, things are organized. So yes, campaign naming.
Yeah, we call it account hygiene, basically.
Yeah, and how did that relate to the the tech behind it? Is that the campaign has an ID, which is a string of numbers that doesn't change. Like the computer reads that, but then now the campaign name can be whatever you want it to be, which is really nice.
Beautiful. Mm-hmm. So it's for humans and computers, which is the important nexus here.
Yes. And if you need some philosophies on organizing your campaign names, we can link to that in the show notes here because we've got a good episode on that. So yeah, you can update campaign names. Never thought the day would come. And here it is.
So another thing, Mike, that you noticed is commas and symbols are not available for numbers. So 50%, or you and I might be quite inclined to put a percentage sign in the back, is just 50. Okay, no percentage sign needed. It's actually really nice.
Yeah. So that way your spreadsheet formatting isn't all wonky.
Right.
Again, this is another one of those cool things. Part of the reason you won't get confused is because if you're changing something, you'll know what the entity is. So like if you're changing a bid, you'll know that the number is going to be like the dollar amount. If you're updating a placement, it will be like a percentage. So like those kinds of things, super helpful.
Right. So the context is already established. It's not necessary to reiterate it with the symbols.
Yeah. Jumping into another really, really big area is just sponsored display. The sponsored display is relatively new in the world of Amazon advertising. And so the old bulk file wasn't integrated with sponsored display. However, when you go and you download your bulk file now, which is the first thing you should do to acquaint yourself with all this stuff, you'll notice so many extra columns that you hadn't seen before. The example that you had in your spreadsheet, like how far right did it go? Like how many columns were we looking at?
In the old version for sponsored display?
In the new version.
Oh gosh, it was well, you know how Excel loops around. So I think it was like AC or AD. I could check, but it was a massive amount of columns, and I was out of my depth. I was like, oh boy, I don't know what half of these are.
Yeah, so many new sponsored display columns that we didn't have before. So it lists all kinds of things like audience targeting IDs. So this is a really helpful thing. You can now create campaigns and ad groups using audience targeting ID, product targeting IDs. So this is very frustrating. If you download an existing sponsored display campaign, and let's say it's audience targeting, let's say you've got filters like 5 stars and up or whatever, or let's say you've got some kind of category product targeting type thing, and you download that spreadsheet of an already existing campaign, you'll see all of that stuff. However, if you try to create it, you won't know it until it actually gets created. So you have to create the things inside Amazon first. Then you can download it and see the actual individual audience targeting IDs, and then you can create new ones based off that same audience targeting. Yeah, so it's kind of this wonky workaround.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's kind of unavoidable though, because what's the other solution? They have a wizard that helps you pick one, and it's not clear, but it's something.
I would love a wizard that I can just type it in. That way, like I'll just know the ID. It's kind of strange that it doesn't have like the full. There's no place I can go get a full summary. Like I should be able to just download a spreadsheet of like every category ID, which is really nice.
One can dream. Maybe version 3.
I know.
I correct myself, by the way, with the sponsored display. It goes all the way to AN. So that's serious stuff.
Yes. Another really, really great update is when an error occurs, none of the changes are implemented. Whereas the old format, some would be implemented and some wouldn't, which would make it very difficult to work with. Because like what actually changed, what didn't change. So this is really neat. Mm-hmm. And I think you pointed this one out.
I did, but shout out to Liz. Liz, a friend of the show, bulk file queen. Absolutely phenomenal with these things. She brought this up on a discussion I had recently where she was involved. And I thought, oh man, that's so cool. I wrote it right down and remembered it for this call. And yeah, I mean, I guess the conceit behind that, Mike, is like, first of all, when you're using column C, you're saying exactly what operation you want done. But if there's an error, and there's going to be errors, bulk files are complicated. Basically, you don't have to go back and guess which things are applied. Oh, wait, I missed this one, but that one had an error. Oh, gosh, which ones are actually active? Especially if you miss like one and all the rest of them are applied, but then one is not. Frustrating.
Somewhat related to that is when you are downloading your bulk sheet, you could exclude a particular campaign type. Like you can exclude, if you don't want to look at your sponsored products and you only want to look at your sponsored brands, you could exclude sponsored products and sponsored display and only look at sponsored brands. So it allows you to, clean up your optimization flow by excluding certain campaign types, which is a nice little bonus. If you were running that filter after the fact, like in your spreadsheet program, you're running that filter, you can now do it ahead of time. It makes life a little bit easier.
Yeah, because we used to delete those tabs if we didn't want to make mistakes, but now they just don't show up.
Yes. So as we sort of wrap up here, and thank you so much, dear listener, for listening to a podcast about spreadsheets. Props to you. The thing that I will say, and we'll link to it in our show notes, which is basically like a 2-step action plan for you. Like 1, go and download the new bulk file. Look around. It's not that intimidating. With the new labels, you'll be able to much better understand what each row is telling you. Like that's the first action item. The second action item is to try to create some campaigns. So if you've been putting off creating sponsored brand keyword targeting campaigns, that's a really easy one to get started with. So like create some new sponsored brands. And the reason why that's easy, because you don't need like audience IDs or product targeting IDs, which is nice for categories. But the way to get acquainted with that is in the show notes, we'll link to the actual documentation from Amazon. You should know where this documentation lives. That way, when you're creating it, you can like follow along. So it'll say like sponsored brands, campaign creation columns that you need. So it'll walk you through like what you need to write for your first column and your second and your third. And then eventually you'll get to columns like, enter the keywords that you want in the ad group. So it's a really, really great way to get comfortable with it. So I'd leave you with that action item. It's in the show notes. The URL is really long. Otherwise, I'd read it right here, but just go check out the show notes. Final thoughts on the new bulk sheets updates, Brent, as it's gotten dark in your window as over the course of this episode.
Evening has fallen here. Yeah. My only last thought is really, I'm a big fan of the new format for the simplicity. And I think that they use some kind of like first principles thinking to restructure it in a big way. So in my mind, it really is a 2.0. It's not like a 1.1 or a 1.5. It's really a clean break. And I think they'll support the legacy one for a while, but I would expect that, eventually this is the way it's going to be. Maybe they'll make some small tweaks.
I don't know of any reason to use the old one right now. Just learn the new one.
Yeah, unless you're having massive issues with it. But I've really been pushing our team to try the new one, especially for renaming as our biggest use case as an agency right now. Just, hey, there's no excuse for having sloppily named campaigns and even ad groups, none whatsoever. Go change those. Yeah. Furthermore, the last thing I was going to say, the documentation you talk about linking to, it's surprisingly well written and clear. So kudos to whoever at Amazon did that. Good job.
Props.
Major props.
Yes. Well, Brent, thank you so much for traveling around the French countryside to sit at your desk and record a podcast, Amazon advertising, bulk sheets. The world is better for it.
No problem.
We appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike.
Yes. Have a good one, Brent. Brent from AMZ Pathfinder. It's always a privilege. Can't wait to have you back. Have a good one.